All right. So, and speaking of stories, I've dug up an old story of mine. I just downloaded and put it on a Word doc. It's 2,000 words, so we'll see if we have time for it. It's about the golden calf. We're going to read the golden calf story today. It's my interpretation of the golden calf. Uh,
Do we need costumes?
I thought Betsy's golden calf costume was adorable.
Yeah, it was funny.
Um, uh, one of the puzzles, we're going to look at the golden calf story. We're going to do a close read and deconstruct the story. But one of the puzzles of the story is the following. Once the golden, I hope there aren't any spoilers in what I'm about to say. I'm assuming you know the story. Um, uh, Once Moses smashes the tablets and destroys the golden calf, he and a bunch of Levites go about and in good Old Testament fashion kill a lot of people, but they don't kill Aaron. And Aaron is the one who succumbed to the demands of the people, and he builds the golden calf. So the question is, why didn't Aaron die? And that's what my story tries to answer.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so like at a quarter, wherever we are at about 11:30, we'll see. And and I'll ask you if the tolerance, I'll read it to you. Um, um, and maybe I'll bring it up on screen share so you can read it along while I'm reading it to you. It was published in something called Jewish Magazine, which I'm not sure is still around anymore. Every time I contributed a story to them, they accepted it. So I stopped sending them stories. I figured, well, they must not have a very good critical eye. They just accept anything I send. It was like that old Groucho Marx thing. I wouldn't join a country club that would have me as a member.
Right.
I
love it.
So here's the setting. Moses is up on top of Mount Sinai. The people are down below. Moses has been there for 40 days, and the people get very restless, and they go to Aaron and they demand that he build them this god. And it raises a lot of, I think, questions and and some ancillary questions. Namely, these are people who have witnessed the miraculous. And not that long ago, right? I mean, they witnessed the giving of the Torah, they witnessed the 10 plagues, they witnessed and participated in the crossing of the sea. And there they are out in the wilderness, and Moses is gone. I got to read Jason's text in a second. Moses is gone for 6 weeks, just under 6 weeks, and they start to pine for a divine being. Now that's another question. Like, why is it that the people who have been so immersed in the mythological structure of the Jewish story, they witnessed firsthand all of these great images of that we only talk about, right? The sea, the plagues, the Torah, and yet they lose faith. So that's another main. That's probably a more interesting question than why Moses, why Aaron wasn't punished. All right, so let's bring up the text. I didn't set it up. I have it up on my thing here, but yeah, there we go. There we go. Exodus 32:1. There we go. All right. Vayar ha'am ki voshesh Moshe leredet min hahar. Vayikahel ha'am al Aaron vayomer elav hum aseh lanu Elohim asher yelchu lefneinu ki zeh Moshe ha'ish asher ha'elanu me'eretz Mitzrayim lo yadanu mehayalo. All right. When the people Is that visible, sufficiently visible? When the people saw Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron. I'm just going to check this, right? Against the preposition is al, ayin lamed, and against obviously is the translation the translators chose, but I'm not sure it needs to be that strong. Gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us, for that fellow Moses, the man who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." So let's consider this verse. It's not God they want, it's Moses. So what do you think this verse is telling us about, let me put it this way, the spiritual consciousness that the people possess? In other words, it doesn't say make us a God because we haven't seen Yahweh. Yahweh hasn't done anything for us lately. They want they're concerned about Moses, and in Moses' absence, they want a God, a pestle, an idol.
Well, we know that God was sort of working through Moses. He raises his arms and things happen and all these sorts of things. So there's probably a sense of seeing Moses as an embodiment, and you need to have something that's physical and tangible in your midst as the way that God can act among you. And if Moses isn't there, then they want it in some other form. But they seem to need something real in front of them as opposed to just the notion or the faith in and of itself.
I like that. Any other? That's pretty good. Yeah, Jane?
And doesn't this, I think Jason has totally nailed it. And this is one of the reasons that we don't know where Moses is buried. Because we would tend to make a God out of him. Once again, something tangible, something that you can hold on to, a place you can go to worship this man. So I think the beginning and the end work very nicely here.
There's a problem with what you say, Jane. When I was in rabbinical school, Betsy and I and a couple of friends of ours went into the Sinai.
Yeah.
And we went off the beaten path, and we hit something. I uncovered something, and it turns out it was Moses. We found Moses in the middle of the Saturday, but we kept it quiet because we didn't want to change history. That your point is well taken. There seems to be some intuition in the flow of the story or the author in the flow of the story that we want to keep Moses's location anonymous.
Oh, sorry.
Now, if you were Aaron, what would you say to these people?
Well, obviously, he'll be back isn't working, and look at this. Aaron is one person against this whole communal anxiety. It's pretty hard to hold out against this. And also, I think we're demanding way too much of these people. This is all very new. Miracle that you experience by crossing the Red Sea or not. They don't really have, I don't feel that the B'nai Yisrael has a concept, a strong concept of what and who God is.
Well, there's the classic. I'm trying to figure out a good way to say this. But we understand that the people are immature. This is a bad one. Once you get to the book of Numbers, you got a few others, right? The failure of the spies, the demand for water. There's a third one, and we see how weak the people are, I mean, in terms of their consciousness. But they saw this, they crossed the sea split. God thundered down the Torah. We'll see in the Torah that they have yet to see the physicality of the Torah. I see your hand, Jason. The physicality of the Torah. But I'm just throwing this back at you. These are the paradigmatic miracles of the Jewish story. These aren't some, this isn't some menorah that lasts for 8 days when it's supposed to last for one. That's a Pisher miracle. I mean, ought these not be sufficient to gird your loins with?
No.
Biblical phrase. And you say no. Okay, well, that's all right.
And I say no because they're very recent. They don't, in a certain sense, make sense. And also, there's no guarantee. See, this is it. There's no guarantee that these miracles are going to continue.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's also a good point. All right, Jason, and then Shana.
Well, it hasn't been mentioned in a while in the text, but the manna is continuing to show up every day. And we can assume it's still there at this time because it continues for quite a long time after. So, I mean, if I'm Aaron, I don't want to let Aaron off the hook too quickly. I think I can point to the ground every single day and say, look, God has yet again provided you the sustenance you need every day that Moses has been gone. You're not lacking for something physical. You're not actually lacking anything. I mean, we can read more of the story before we get too critical of Aaron, but I mean, I think Aaron had opportunity here to, and maybe they just skipped that part of the story where he tried for 40 days to hold them off, and then this is when he finally was like, okay, enough. You want something, I'll give you something.
Well, and that's a good literary point. We don't see any of the interaction between Aaron and the people in the previous 40 days. Okay, Shana?
Hi. Well, I just wanted to piggyback off what Jane said about being a bit too harsh on them and point out that previously, before the Red Sea, before the 10 plagues, they were enslaved. And I think there's an element of learned helplessness there, and an element of perhaps not understanding the concept of fate without there being some master or a proxy of a master.
Yeah, and so perhaps one of the I don't even want to say perhaps one of the powerful subtexts of the Israelite story through the middle of Exodus to the end of Numbers, because Deuteronomy is a different animal, and leaving out the book of Leviticus because it's a different animal. One of the powerful subtexts is the maturation of the people, so that at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and if you've looked at the book of Deuteronomy, it's not a narrative. There are no stories in Deuteronomy. It's all these long speeches by Moses. They've had their 40 years of wandering. It's not one but two generations later, and they're ready to go across the Jordan River. And so this one of the subtexts is their spiritual weakness and the gaining of that strength in the 40 years. Now, Jason reminded me of the third story in Numbers that hadn't come to mind, which was the story of meat. They get tired of manna and they demand meat, and in the demand they wax nostalgic about how great the food was back in Egypt. And so God sends, I forget what kind of bird, if there's a specific bird, and they all just fall by the thousands, probably the tens of thousands onto the Israelites. Wendy?
Yeah, I wanted to build off that idea of learned helplessness. And the Bnei Israel, they seem very childlike to me. They need constant reassurance. And with Moses gone, they don't have it. Kind of like children.
All right, and so what's not said yet is the contrast between Moses as a leader and Aaron as a leader. I mean, Aaron's been Moses's partner through the whole process, though we see him actually doing and saying very little. So let's proceed. Let's proceed. The next verse, well, again, as I frequently point out about the nature of biblical literature, the author doesn't say, Aaron went into his tent and thought about this and realized, he's not like Moses, and what can he do? And these people are a handful. I guess I'm going to have to acquiesce. So Aaron said to them, "You take off your gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off all the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took them. Now, where did the gold come from? Remind me where the gold came from. These were former slaves. How could they have gold rings enough to make a
What the Egyptians gave them that they took as they left.
exactamundo? That's right. So they turned them into rings and earrings and nose rings and whatever. He took them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, I'm going to read the Hebrew. Vayomru, Ela Elohecha Yisrael, Asher Elucha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. This is your God, Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So how quickly and easily it is for these people to look at this thing that just came out of the kiln, right? Just came out of the kiln, all still hot and melty. And this is the thing that led them out of Egypt. That's really something. Now, this next sentence, I read as possibly foreshadowing. Vayar Aharon vayiven mizbech lefanav vayikra Aharon vayomer Hag l'Adonai machar. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar for it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to Adonai." Now the irony is, tomorrow is when Moses comes down. Is the reestablishment of God's presence. It's in a negative kind of way, but still. And so one wonders, and if we do get to my reading this story, and if not, I'll send it out. This is what clued me as to the possible fictional reason as to what Aaron was doing. I don't want to put too much into this, and I'd be interested in your responses, but it seems as if, it seems pretty clear that Aaron is weak. He can't stand up with Moses' authority and hold the people in abeyance. But maybe he realizes that this is going to change something, and I'll leave it at that. Early the next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink and then rose to dance. So, what's this? If you remember, after Joseph's brothers throw him into a pit, what do? They sit down and have a meal. They roast some stuff. They roast some meat and they have pita and hummus and all of that, while Joseph is in the pit. Now I'm reminded of that in this case, just because what the author is telling us is in engaging wildly in this idolatrous activity, they sit down and they sit down and eat and drink, and then they dance. An interesting question came to mind when I was preparing for this little skit last night at the synagogue. Where is Miriam in this story? She's conveniently absent. So wanting to have at least one girl's role in this little skitlet that we put on last night, I created Miriam, and Betsy made a nice little costume. But where is Miriam? That's another good midrash. Where did she go? Adonai spoke to Moses. All right. So now the scene switches to the top of the mountain. Vaydaber Adonai Moshe, lech red ki shochet amcha asher ha'eleta me'eretz Mitzrayim. So now look at the language here. Adonai spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely." Telling Moses what he knows and reminding us as to who actually brought the people out, right? Not that calf that was just created 12 hours ago, but Moses. They have been quick to turn aside from the way I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." So it's an exact quote. Sometimes when things are repeated, the words are somewhat changed. Ela Elohecha Yisrael asher ha'elucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. But actually, let me just check this back here. Yeah, it's the exact same words. So, I'm getting this. Adonai further said to Moses, "I see this is a stiff-necked people. I'm going to, and it's good to keep the Hebrew in mind. Am kashay oref, a people of a difficult neck, there's a stiff-necked people." And I'd be interested in knowing how long that phrase has been operative in this verse. I'm emphasizing it because it's going to repeat, I think, 2 other times in the story, at least 2 other times. So, hey, somebody interpret that for me. Help me understand what stiff-necked people means. It's a great metaphor. How does it work? Yeah, Christine.
They're stubborn and they're not learning. I keep thinking of MAGA, but these are people who are easily swayed. There's a new Messiah, and blah blah blah, and they need something material right in front of their face, because they have no faith.
Yeah. Now, God says, "Let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation." God's really angry, right? And
Yeah.
he wants to send a plague over the whole camp, 2.5 million people, and then somehow out of Moses, I'm going to clone 2.5 million of you, Moses, and we'll have a great nation, not these schlubs that are such a big problem. But Moses, what does he do? He implored his God. Vayachal Moshe et Pnei Adonai Elohav. Yeah, his God. So that's an interesting phrase. Moses implored his God Adonai, saying, "Let not your anger, Adonai, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand." And by the way, if Pesach isn't that far off. We've already made a reservation with the caterer, lest you worry about food. But koach gadol uvayad chazaka. Now, koach gadol, I don't remember from the Haggadah, but uvayad chazaka is a phrase that's prominent in the Haggadah. So Moses is saying, calm down there, fella. Remember, you delivered these people with a great power and a mighty hand. But here's this kills me. This always cracks me up when I read this verse. Let not the Egyptians say it was with the evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. So what does Moses say? He doesn't say Jane, I'll come to you in a second. He doesn't say these are basically good people, God. They just, I don't know exactly what they've done yet, but they've slipped a little bit. But why consider such a drastic bit of action? He doesn't say that. He says it's bad public relations. It's bad public relations. It's as if out there in the middle of the desert, if something were to happen, the word would get back to Egypt, and the Egyptians would say, it was all a bad idea on the part of this guy. It was evil intent. You brought them out only just to kill them. What kind of creator of the universe is that? Jane, what's on your mind?
Can we go back to the paragraph where God says to Moses, "Now let me be"? There, okay. In light of what happens afterwards, it struck me, because my question was, now why does God want Moses not to be there, not to be present, not to be talking to him, not to be questioning him? And I'm just wondering if God has an intuition that Moses is going to stick up for his people.
Well, how do you get that from that?
Now let me be. In other words, leave me alone, because I'm going to let this anger blaze. He doesn't want Moses there. My question is why? And is it because God intuits that Moses is going to talk him out of it?
No, maybe. I mean, it's a good point. I will also say, if we can do a quick review, and I thought about this already in my preparation. Let's do a quick review of Moses and God. So Moses and God meet at the burning bush, and Moses is radically reluctant, right? God has to persuade him over and over again, a few times, to go and do the mission that God wants him to do. And in the end, the only way that God can get Moses to do what God wants is to bring Aaron. And we're going to bring Aaron, and he's going to be your spokesman. And an interesting bit of work would be to sort of explore the encounters between God and Moses from that point until now, and see how Moses' character grows to the point where he can argue with God. I find this argument really amusing, but nevertheless, he can argue with God and succeed. He can successfully get God to change God's mind, right? Hold on a second, Betsy. Well, all right, we got a couple more verses. Yeah, Betsy, what's up? Where'd you go?
Am I still here? Yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. So I always, when I think about this, I always think about, like, if God was interviewing people for the job, for Moses's job, what qualities would he be looking for? Like, what would the interview be like? Because he picks a peculiar fellow, to step up for this role. I mean, he's a former prince, so he might be very arrogant on one hand. On the other hand, he's clearly also very humble. He doesn't want the job. It's not like he applied for it. And I think, sort of apropos of your point, Phil, I just think that God does see things in Moses that Moses doesn't see in himself. And God knows the qualities that he needs in the person for this job. And even though we don't see them right away, and we can parse it as the story goes through and kind of pull out the character traits and the skills that Moses brings to his position, it's sort of an interesting way of thinking about it. I always find, like, what are the job qualifications, and does Moses have them? And would he be, if I was the HR manager, would I have ruled this guy out long before I sent him over to God to actually apply, for the position in the particular department? But God needs Moses. He needs somebody who's going to stand up to him, despite the fact that he has great humility. And we also don't even know where he's buried. He doesn't leave that. Anyway.
Yeah. All right. And so there's the PR argument, and then there's the covenantal argument. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the heaven, and I will give your offspring this whole land of which I spoke to possess forever. I'll get to you just a second, Jason. So what's this argument? You made a deal with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you promised them the land. There's still nothing about the ultimate goodness of the people. It's as if, yeah, you're right, these people are stonks. But we don't want the Egyptians to think badly of you, Yahweh, and we don't want to desecrate the memory of our ancestors. And Yahweh renounced the punishment planned for God's people. Okay, Jason?
Well, I just want to follow up on what Betsy was saying in sort of the Musar study that I've done. When we talk about humility, Anava, we talk about it as having two sides, and one of them is getting away from the traditional thought in English of humility as debasement or meekness, but we see it more as filling your complete space that and occupying your rightful place. And so I would say that you can see that Moses had it in him. And if you were a very astute observer of his character, you might have been able to determine that he may have shied away from the role initially because it was such a huge role, but he had the ability within him to rise to the fullness of what was required. And that's the characteristic that the HR person hopefully saw deep within him and could see that he was capable of filling the space, as very few would have.
All right, Shayna, then Jane.
I have a question. Based on these two arguments, and maybe it's a false question, maybe the answer is null or both or not applicable. Which of those two arguments do we think was the most convincing to God?
Well, that's a good question.
I think it would be the one where the argument of what are you going to look like to the other gods? What are the, people are just going to say, you can't even control your own people. You have to destroy them, where the other gods can control them, their peoples.
See, I think I would go with the second one because Moses says, "Look, man," to God, "Look, man, you signed a contract, and I got the contract right here because you just gave it to me, over these last 40 days, and we're going to take you to court."
They're not going to be there though.
You're breaking the deal, God.
There have been generations of brisses to prove that we followed your request.
And by the way, it's been a long time since I've read David Hartman's book on the covenant, but I remember right at the very beginning, he analyzes the notion of covenant in the sense that, and he believed in, Hartman, at least at the time that he wrote the book, because I understand he underwent some changes philosophically as he aged. But at the time he wrote the book, he believed in the God that was a conscious being who went into an arrangement with the Israelites, the Jews, and in order to do that, God has to, as it were, diminish God's power in order to be somewhat on an equal plane with the Israelites. So what Moses is doing here is he's saying, you made a contract, and you made a contract, and not with me, by the way, but with these guys who lived, a couple hundred years ago, and you can't break it. So God renounced. But by the way, I want to double check something here. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, heinichali, leave me alone. It's the same verb as here. Vayinachem Adonai, and God renounced the punishment. It's translated differently. Announced the punishment planned for God's people. Thereupon Moses turned and went down from the mountain, bearing the two packs of the tablet. Now note this, before you read it. What's our usual sense of the tablets that Moses had in his hands going down, right? It had Roman numerals, right? 1 to 10, right? Or sometimes if the tablets are bigger, if they're imaged if they're imaged bigger, then you got the 10 commandments, right? And that's what seems to be on the tablets, but that's not what it says here. Moses turned and went down from the mountain, bearing the two tablets of the pact, tablets inscribed on both of their surfaces. They were inscribed on one side and on the other. So this brings to mind something I was reminded of in a conversation with somebody last week. It brings to mind microfiche. that maybe the whole Torah really was inscribed on these two tablets in tiny miniature that you needed a special machine to go see. But it's not the Ten Commandments. Whatever it is, it ain't the Ten Commandments. That's a kind of later imagining as to what he had in his hands. But this is, whatever it is, it's writing on both sides. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing incised upon the tablets. And that's important to note too, because I mean, this wasn't Moses, doing the work of inscription on the tablets while God dictated. This is actual, however you can imagine it happened. These were tablets upon which God himself wrote. And that makes these tablets ever significantly more important than if you think that Moses did the writing. Right? This is God's very handiwork, literally speaking, is on the tablets. Yeah, Jason.
It seems like you've brought up a hugely important question, which is how did we get this incorrect assumption of the Ten Commandments on there? And it's, you see it, in all the places where they try to put where Christian groups try to put the Ten Commandments up in a public place. It's always done in this way that looks like these were the words that were on these tablets. And, I mean, it's such a commonplace assumption that's so clearly not in this text. I mean, like, I'd love to know, where did that leap come from? I mean, has anybody ever researched when that started being? Is it just because it's easy to portray in art, and maybe it was done, in medieval or Renaissance art, and that's where we got the idea? I don't know.
I have a guess. I don't have an answer. And I have to tell you, I've read this story any number of times, and at least in my mind, which is getting ever fuzzier, this is the first time I've actually ever noticed this. I don't know why I never noticed it before. But the answer is that in the actual story, going back several parshiot, God utters the Ten Commandments, and at that point, the people become unable to hear anymore. And so it seems like it might be a reasonable assumption, a reasonable thinking. It might seem a good thought to take that moment in the story and assume what's on the tablets. But that's not the story here, right? I don't know. That's just a guess, right? That's just a guess. But it's an interesting thing that we don't keep in mind, because we're so used to seeing, the image of tablets without even necessarily the words, just Roman numerals, right? They didn't have Roman numerals back in them days.
Right, and even the two-sidedness is significant, because that would be very hard to portray visually in art or something like that. So you would have generally seen an image that would have looked like it was only on one side, because it would have required some sort of motion in the, painting.
Yeah, and if I had thought about it, although I'd have looked up that moment in the Mel Brooks movie where Moses is coming down the mountain with 15 commandments, and he drops one of the tablets. I'm coming down 15 the 10 commandments. And if you think about looking for it, you'll see that you'll hear that there's a little bit of narration before Moses speaks, and the voice is Charlton Heston, which is pretty funny. So, okay, now suddenly Joshua is there. Hold on, Betsy, let me read the verse. So Joshua heard the sound of, it doesn't say where Joshua is actually located, but you figure he's at the foot of the mountain. And there may be something earlier, but I don't think so. Earlier, going back to the parasha where the Ten Commandments are given, where we know Joshua was sitting there. But it looks like Joshua, Moses's aide de camp, is down at the bottom of the mountain. Joshua heard the sound of the people and its boisterousness. He said to Moses, "There is a war, and there is a cry of war in the camp." Betsy.
Geez, this hand goes up when I don't expect it to. Anyway, I was just having a hard time, I guess, as Jason was getting off that point about the Ten Commandments not being actually on the tablets. And I forget the wording exactly, but the word pact was used back in the text there, the translation. And so it's really, oh, there it is. went down from the mountain bearing the 2 tablets of the pact. So isn't that essentially that it's a reiteration of the covenant, right? And I just find that really such a powerful image that at this moment in time, God, recommits himself to the covenant of the Israelites. I just,
Well, it's not the word brit, it's the word edut, which means which also means like witness or witnessing. Shnei luchot ha'edut biyado.
so what is the pact if it's not the covenant? I mean, because that's what Moses is just exhorting him with above. Remember the covenant, remember the promise you made. So what is it that he puts? It would seem like that's what he would put on the tablets, but it's interesting that that's not the word that's used. So
Not
I
the word
guess
brit, it's vague. We don't and we don't know what the contents are exactly.
what else would the pact refer to besides the covenant?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it refers to the covenant at all. But it's the word. That's a question to look. Which if I had, I don't have my altar with me. Altar might have a comment on that, and I don't have my copies back. My copies at the temple. I can't answer the question. I don't really know.
Okay.
So he says, let's see, Vayomer ein kol anot gvura. There is not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It is the sound of song that I hear. Now this has the appearance of being a later edition because of the language of it. It's different. This is one of these places where if I had a different kind of book, I could see the speculation as to what scholars think. If scholars think this is a text from some other source that gets interpolated into the text. But how do you understand that? First of all, who is saying it?
Joshua.
Who is saying it? The subject isn't identified. The translators, by taking the letter Vav, which has a wide range of meanings, but usually means and, they translate it as but. And by saying but, they seem to be putting this into Moses's mouth and not Aaron's. And the word is not answered. The word is vayomer, which is 90% of the time translated as and he said. So the translators in their choice here make a choice of identifying the speaker. They may be right, they may be wrong. But but whoever is saying it, and it probably makes a difference whether it's Moses or Joshua, but we can't know. It's not the sound of the tune of triumph, nor the tune of defeat. It's the song, it's the sound of song. Kol anot anochi shomea. Anybody got a speculation?
I guess I assumed it was Moses
No,
responding to Joshua.
I don't mean the speaker. I don't think we can know.
Oh, okay.
The translators believe it was Moses, and they have good reason, I presume. But it's not triumph, it's not defeat, it's song.
It seems like a very poetic device to
Okay,
elaborate in that way.
all right. But that's okay. That's
celebration.
good. But what is it? The sound of song, not triumph, not defeat, but song.
Oh,
It's celebration.
Celebration. Yeah,
the
yeah,
sound of people having a good time.
yeah, yeah. They're not. They're reveling in and so it makes what they've done, I think, even more disgusting. Like they've made this thing which Moses has yet to see, and they're celebrating. And as soon as Moses came near the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing. He became enraged, and he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. So what has he just done, right? He's destroyed, not figuratively speaking God's word, but literally, because God was not only the author, but the printer. He was the publisher. And boom, he destroys the tablets.
Well,
Betsy.
well, God wanted to destroy the people, which Moses talked him out of, but Moses sounds like just as angry as God was, but instead of destroying the people, which he doesn't have the ability to do in the same way that God would do, he destroyed the tablets. It's kind of a nice parallelism.
So instead of destroying the people, Moses destroys God's word. There's something to be made from that. Now I will tell you that Maimonides, who sees Moses as the ultimate prophet / philosopher, argues that Moses was had such a magisterial philosophical mind that he actually never lost his temper. Maimonides argues that this is a device on Moses's part it's a conscious device on Moses's part to get the attention of the people, express his disgust, his absolute disgust, but not really an act of temper. But you got to be Maimonides to say that. It looks pretty clear that Moses was
He's pissed off.
really angry. That's what the text says. Yeah, Jane.
Okay, a couple of things are coming up. I pulled out my Rashi, and I really think that some of our questions have to do with translation, because Rashi taught Moses, this is 32:15, Moshe turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands. That's where we're getting these 2 tablets from. They were tablets written on both sides, and the writing was visible from either side. So in my head, what I'm seeing are the 10 commandments, and no matter which way you turn them, they're always visible. And I think that there's a lot of symbolism in this. The second thing is Aaron. And I want to go back to something you said, Rabbi, which was the burning bush and how reluctant Moses was to take on this task. And God says, oh, don't worry about it. We always have Aaron. Aaron can step in anytime. Well, here's Aaron stepping in for Moses and really not doing a really great job of this. So if I were Moses in this position, I would feel that every piece of me was being assaulted. Because on the one hand, God wants to destroy people, his people, and destroy this covenant. On the other hand, Moses sees and understands that Aaron cannot be relied on. I mean, he's just getting one shock after another, to his psyche, to his body, to his mind, his spirit. I mean, I never realized it until, we were doing this deconstruction. But Aaron is not a substitute for Moses at all. And God was wrong. We don't always have Aaron. Don't worry, Shay. Aaron will always be there. No, that's not true.
Aaron's a good sidekick. I mean, he really does very little. There's very little that's attributed to him. And when there is stuff like when he's putting on the garments, it's rather passive. And yet going forward to the book of Numbers and the water incident, when Moses hits the rock instead of speaking to it, both Moses and Aaron are punished. So Aaron is somehow culpable. All right, so and as soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, we read this already, he became enraged. He took the calf that they had made and burned it. He ground it to powder and strewed it upon the water, so made the Israelites drink it. That's a pretty interesting image. I'm being forced to drink gold-infused water. Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such great sin upon them?" And Aaron said, "Let not my Lord be enraged. You know this people is bent on evil. They said to me, 'Make us a god to lead us. For that fellow Moses, the man who brought us from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him.' So I said to them, 'Whoever has gold, take it off.' They gave it to me, and I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf." So how is Aaron behaving here?
Well,
Making He's making
that is in. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that that's such an interesting phrase. They gave it to me and I hurled it into the fire and out came this calf. I wonder if he intentionally skipped over the process of making the mold because he's being a little bit frightened. He's like, it's not my fault. Or if what we're seeing here is the mythologization, where the calf is given some agency. It hurled it into the fire. It just became.
Okay, that's good. The calf is given agency. That's by Aaron. Okay, anybody else? Christine.
He's just trying to crawl out of accountability. Yeah, to me, it's like, these people are so awful, and what's what I was supposed to do. I threw it into the fire, but then this calf appeared. He's really being a weenie.
Yeah, he has to take Betsy.
This line where he says, they said to me, "Make us a god to lead us," for that fellow Moses, the man who brought us, that whole paragraph. I mean, it's really Aaron taking on the voice of the people. And as Christine said, being a real weenie. I mean, he could have had such a different response, because even here it shows that, Aaron it wasn't Moses who brought them from the land of Egypt, it was God. I mean, Aaron could have had such a different response to the people by saying, it's not just Moses, guys. Have some faith. Hold in there. Hold on there. This is God who's done this. God is with us. Instead of this, well, we don't know where he went, and sort of reinforcing the immaturity of the people.
All right, Jason.
Well, I'm struck by a bit of a contrast that we've come very quickly from the people were stiff-necked, as we've discovered, stubborn, obstinate, something. And now we have this line where he says, "You know that this people is bent on evil," which is a very, very different interpretation of who we are as individuals. And I mean, bent on evil is to me, extremely strong phrase. And it implies that there's less free will in this, that we are, just sort of naturally inclined to it, and that Aaron just got caught up in this, but that's certainly not the way the story was told the first time. And I think that's quite a dramatic way for him to reframe it, to get it off of his own responsibility.
Yeah, Christine.
I think from going way back where it says the people were against Aaron, I think he's afraid of the people, first of all, and what they might do. And this is a way of saying, look, what could I do? How could I do it? These people are just evil. And but he's trying to evade his own cowardice.
And
he could have also said, look, he's up on the mountain. We know that this is a sacred quest. Have some patience. We really need to wait and see. He could have said a lot of things, but he didn't. He just went along with it. But I think it's out of fear. I think he's afraid of the people.
Well,
So he attributes evil to them.
I mean, there's a couple of things I want to say, but I'm going to hold off on the possibility that I'll read that's my story because I read it over this morning and I still like it, so maybe I will read it to you. But Moses, I mean Aaron rather, is minimizing, but not totally. He's minimizing his culpability, but I guess in the face of his brother, he can't totally discredit. He has to take some credit for what happened. So, and I said, whoever has gold, take it off. Now, what he actually says is much more elaborate, and of course, then he is responsible for the mold and the kiln and bringing it out. But somehow, I put it into the fire, and out came this calf. Beyond collecting the gold and throwing it into the fire, I have no further responsibility. Moses saw the people were out of control since Aaron had let them get out of control. So the narrator is reminding us that Aaron has much more responsibility, so that they were a menace to any who might oppose them. Moses stood up at the gate of the camp and said, "Whoever is for Yahweh, come here." And all the Levites, all the men of Levi rallied to him. Remember, Moses and Aaron are Levites themselves. And he said to them, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, each of you put sword on thigh, go back and forth from gate to gate throughout the camp and slay sibling, neighbor, and kin." This is the Old Testament mentality. The men of Levi did as Moses had bidden, and some 3,000 of the people fell that day. So we could always argue, as I guess we have a right to, when the numbers of dead are added up, in God sending plague, and in this case, the Levites slaying those guilty. But if we can put that aside, because it's the Old Testament mentality, the Hebrew Bible mentality. What is the author telling us? I mean, that's a lot of people. It was not a minority move. I mean, there are 2.5 million people, so maybe you can say only 3,000 out of that. But a lot of people fell into this trap of worshiping Yahweh. I beg your pardon, worshiping the golden calf. I'm sorry. I'm going to turn my phone over. I just got a text and it distracted me for a second. I'm sorry. It's from a friend of mine. A lot of people died. A lot of people were involved in this terrible sin. And keep in mind that, I mean, the sin of the golden calf is a big one. It mars the whole Israelite experience, the whole Israelite history, that in a moment of weakness, having, as I said earlier, and we argued about this, having witnessed great miracles sent on their behalf by Yahweh, they turned to idolatry. And this is a motif, of course, that repeats itself throughout the prophets. That the prophets are always railing against the Israelites for their idolatrous behavior. Now, I remember, by the way, Harry Orlinsky, one of my Bible teachers, who was really one of the greats in his generation of biblical scholarship, pointed out that, said more than once in class, that archaeological evidence has not shown up significant engagement, Israelite engagement, Jewish engagement in idolatry. And his argument was that the prophets were finely attuned to idolatrous behavior, and any whiff of it, compelled them to exaggerate, and because they wished desperately to avoid behavior, engagement in paganism. Jason?
Well, this is a bit off of what you were saying, but I'm a bit troubled by the justice being meted out here, in that it's not really clear which 3,000 people deserved the death penalty, and how, Moses is supposed to be a judge, and where did they find the evidence that specifically made these 3,000 guilty to the point of death and everyone else went unpunished? It seems a rather, and why only 3,000 if so many, and which 3,000?
And hold on, Christine, just a second. And I mean, it's a really good point. And here the biblical writing style does us a disservice, or because we're left to speculate precisely as you do, Jason. Why these 3,000? Why not more? How do we know? It's exactly right, Christine.
Well, I think that in a way, Moses on a micro scale is doing exactly what he told God not to do. You know, he was going to destroy everybody. And then he goes back and does exactly the same thing, which is without evidence, without any kind of trial, without any kind of anything. He sort of has 3,000 men put to death.
Yes. Anybody want to defend it?
I just want to say, and why not Aaron? Why does Aaron get a
Well,
Scott?
I said that at the beginning. That's the question. Why Aaron, why doesn't Aaron get punished? He
Yeah.
survived. Now, one answer I've heard, which is a kind of a reductionist one, is simply that, you know, the authorship is from the Levite point of view. And so you just can't punish Aaron. But my story has the right answer. So if we should get to it.
Okay, at
Well,
the
we know
risk of-
Aaron's sons get punished at some point, so it's not
Yeah.
like they're, you know, immune.
yeah.
And their punishment, which is not in this parsha, is a weird one. They brought the language is they brought a strange fire to Adonai. And hard to know what that really is, and they get killed. Betsy?
I was going to take off on Christina's point that Aaron does, that Moses does what, you know, he taught God out of doing, of killing all the people, but Moses doesn't kill. Maybe it's the reason why he doesn't kill all the people.
Everybody, right.
He doesn't kill everybody. So he kills just this portion, and maybe God planted the idea in his head. Who knows? You know, even as he talked about of killing all the people, maybe it's a warning. Maybe it's a mini version of what God was going to do, and somehow that was justified because God was going to go ahead and kill all of them, so Moses can have just some of them killed.
And it occurs to me, and if somebody's got a better memory than I do, you might argue against this. But it occurs to me this is the only time Moses is responsible for any kind of punitive action. Anything that happens in the book of Numbers, the Israelites get punished left and right. It's God's doing. But here it's under Moses' leadership, which is really, really kind of interesting. And maybe, I see your hand, Christine. Maybe Moses, I don't know, maybe the author wants us to think that, you know, this was necessary to excise this evil from the people. I don't know, Christine?
I want to get back to why not Aaron, because that's a really cool question, Jason. And I think it's because Jason's sin was Aaron's sin was Jason didn't have a sin, not that one anyway. And Aaron's sin was cowardice. It wasn't idolatry.
No, but he doesn't seem to be. We don't have any indication from the text that he's engaged in the activity that he brings into being.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been guilty of a great sin, yet I will now go up to Yahweh. Perhaps I may win forgiveness for your sin. And Moses went back to Yahweh and said, Alas, this people is guilty of a great sin in making for themselves a god of gold. Now, if you will forgive their sin, well and good, but if not, erase me from the record which you have written. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Not that he's expecting, not that he's begging for forgiveness, which I mean, we see Moses, you know, now we see Moses doing what he didn't do, you know, 12 hours ago up on the mountain. Now he's telling God, these people are sinful, but you are a forgiving God. But Yahweh says to Moses, and then he also says, you know, take me, if you're not going to do it, then if I'm reading the verse right, he's saying, you know, and what happens is Moses makes another set of God makes another set of tablets. I don't want to be in that story. Take me out of that story. If you can't find your way to forgive these people, I'm done. I'm done. And there's going to be a little bit more of that happening. But Yahweh said to Moses, only one who has sinned against me will I erase from my record. So, and you obviously have not sinned against me. I can't do that. Go now, lead the people where I told you. See, my messenger shall go before you, that when I make an accounting, I will bring them to account for their sins. I just want to check the Hebrew here. V'ata lech nechei et ha'am el asher dibarti lach. Hine malachi yelech lefanecha. So what is God saying at this moment? He says, I'm done here. I'm done with these people, right? Isn't that what he's saying? I'm going to send a malach, and he's saying messenger. Here the translators, I think, do us a disservice. The word malach means messenger, but it also means angel. And in fact, for the most part in the Bible, not necessarily beyond the Bible, where there's a very sophisticated Israelite Jewish angelology, angels do have they come with messages. They have shlichut. They have a mission. They have a mission. But God is saying, I'm done with you guys. I'll send an angel. I'll send Gabriel. He's a pretty good, reliable angel, but I'm done. Now go lead the people where I told you, but only an angel is going to be before you. I'm done. And then Yahweh sent a plague upon the people for what they did with the calf that Aaron made. So God can't keep God. He has to wipe out a few more people. He's not wiping out the whole people, just the sinful ones. Okay.
Because
Now-
plagues are like that.
Yeah, well, that's true. All right, so we got a little more. We got more to go because there's some really wonderful stuff coming up. But we're done with the golden calf story itself. But the ramifications of it are not complete by any means. Any comments before we move on? Then Yahweh said to Moses, set out from here, you and the people that you have brought up from the land of Egypt to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your offspring I will give it. I will send a messenger before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go in your midst, since you are a stiff-necked people, lest I destroy you on the way. Lest I get so angry with you, I'm going to do what I said I would. I was talked out of before, but I'll send an angel, right? Take your pick, angel, Gabriel, Michael, Louis, whoever you want. When the people heard this harsh word, they went into mourning, and none put on finery. So that's a great. So they didn't put on their Shabbos suits. This is a symbol they dressed in rags as a symbol of mourning and a symbol of repentance. When the king of Nineveh gets word that God's going to destroy Nineveh, Jonah's walking through the town saying 20 more days and Nineveh will be turned to toast. What does the king do, and what does everybody else do?
Rents his clothes.
He rents his clothes and they put on mourning. So this is a symbol of mourning. Yahweh said to Moses, say to the Israelite people, number 3, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go in your midst for one moment, I would destroy you. Now leave off your finery, and I will consider what to do to you. I just love this. It's really wonderful. So the Israelites remained stripped of their finery from Mount Horeb on. And remember, Mount Horeb is a synonym for Sinai. But Moses would take the tent and pitch it outside the camp at some distance from the camp. It was called the tent of meeting. And whoever sought Yahweh would go out to the tent of meeting that was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, which is probably the only person who could, all the people would rise and stand at the entrance of each tent and gaze after Moses until he had entered the tent. And when Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent while God spoke with Moses. So this partnership, this is also further instantiating that partnership with God and Moses. Now Moses would go to the tent of meeting from time to time and go inside, and he and God would have a confab, and the tent of meeting would come down as a symbol that there's, the red light would go on, don't enter the room, right? There's a meeting in progress. And when the people saw the pillar of cloud poised at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise and bow low at the entrance of the tent. Yahweh would speak to God. Now we're gonna have an interesting conflict here, an interesting problem. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe panim el panim, asher yidaber ish el re'ehu. And God would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to another, and the word is re'ehu, as one would speak to a friend, and he would then return to the camp. But his attendant Joshua, son of Nun, his deputy, would not stir out of the tent. I'm not exactly sure what that means. That would seem to imply that Joshua was with him, but I'm not going to get bogged down in that. Moses said to Yahweh, "See, you say to me." Now this is this great moment, okay? And I always think of this as two guys, right, at the end of the long day, sitting next to each other, and they've got a good glass of 30-year-old scotch in their hands and a cigar. And Moses says, "See, you say to me, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Further, you have said, I have singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. Now, if I have truly gained your favor, pray, let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider, too, that this nation is your people." There are two things going on here. Moses is still arguing on behalf of the people, right? This is your people. And by the way, let me know your ways. I want to know you better. Vayomer Panai Elechu v'hanichoti lach. And by the way, this is the third or fourth time this verb, this Hebrew root is being used. And God said, "I will go in the lead and will lighten your burden." Moses talks God out of sending an angel. All right, you don't tell me what angel you're going to send me, O Lord, but I really want you. And God says, all right, I'll do it. And he said, and Moses said, "Unless you go in the lead, do not make us leave this place." And there'll be a little bit more here. "For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, so that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth?" So there's a lot of stuff going on here. But it's more of Moses arguing with God, more of Moses persuading God to change God's mind. How will it be known out there? Now, this is the PR argument. How is it going to be known out there that you're our leader unless you're actually with us? And the other part of this, which I think is really quite powerful, is the reminder to God and to the reader that we have this special relationship with God. And this isn't the time to get into the chosen people thing, although I love talking about that. How is everybody going to know that you gained our favor? And moreover, you have this role, this relationship, this history with us that is a special relationship between you, O eternal God, and us. And you distinguish us from every place on earth. I mean, what does it say? What do we say every time we recite the Aleinu, right? Shahuno tesh. I got Aleinu shabech ladon. Shahuno tesh shamayim v'yosed haaretz u'moshe v'yakaro b'shamayim ima'al. I've got ahead of myself. The Aleinu is another repetition. Of the chosen people doctrine. Betsy?
Well, I was just saying that, if Moses had not talked God out of this, I mean, this to me is the argument for why, the covenant is the reason that God stayed with us. I mean, who would we be if God had left us at this point and left us in the hands of an angel? I mean, who would we be? Would the Jewish faith have developed? Would we be anything at all in the history of the world? Would we be anything, or would we be another just maybe tiny, if even existing religious sect that, well, we are just a tiny religious sect, actually. But who would we be without the idea of the covenant, without God with us, and without this special relationship with the one and only God? I just never thought about it, but we came very close here with the sin of the golden calf of losing that. of losing God.
It's a permanent black mark in our record. Jason?
Well,
Well,
and
if we, oh, sorry, Betsy, go ahead, finish.
well, I was just going to say, and it also speaks, I think, a little bit when we think about the Torah as a living presence, about how we think about our own individual relationship with God. I mean, we all have our challenges with belief, I think, and doubts, but where you come down on it is really about, I mean, maybe this is obvious, but about having faith and about sustaining, um, you know, thousands of years of a relationship that it seems very real to me that we are the descendants of these people and we have a modern day responsibility to affirm the covenant in our own lives.
Okay, all right. Jason?
Well, I'm thinking about how the religions that are descendants of ours, that have way many more people and follow the same God, in theory at least, you know, the Christians and Muslims who have quite a significant population on the planet compared to us. And I wonder, what is it that still distinguishes us? It's that we're still, you know, like we're no longer the only people in this, a small percentage of the world that worships this God. And yet we still consider ourselves distinct because of something we consider a special relationship. And it's got to be something that we're all finding for ourselves in each generation that's significant about the Jewish relationship that differs it from the other relationships. And I think this is something we all still kind of struggle with, is that we're still trying to figure out what is it about our relationship that's any different, and what makes it, you know, is it still special? And if it is special, how are we, you know, what are we doing about that? How are we bringing things into the world that are, you know, that other people aren't? And I think there are certainly people who do certainly try to lead with Jewish values and Jewish ethics. And I think, you know, for instance, the talk we heard on Thursday is about trying to bring Jewishness into, you know, ecological matters and things like that. I think that's where we stand to still use this as an advantage, you know, and have a purpose that's got some moral heft, I guess. I don't know. I'm going a lot of places with this, but it's just, it strikes me as interesting.
No, but both you and Betsy sort of contemporized this issue. This is I mean, I would say it's always been our struggle, but certainly since the 19th century, it's our modern struggle. The integration of the Jews into the world and our living, you know, in every democratic society in which we live among our neighbors, and we're always struggling to see how do we distinguish ourselves. I saw a hand, I forget who it was.
Yeah, it was me. But you know, the other, you know, large, you know, the successor religions they proselytize, and Judaism does not. And while, you know, the Israelites killed neighbors, they didn't try to convert them. And I think one of the major reasons for the spread is the enslavement of other peoples and the insisting on conversion, and also just sheer taking of territory and insisting on conversion or death, which the other ones have done. And so, of course, it's not going to be as widespread because it's not as viciously spread. Not that it's like clean hands, okay, but nevertheless, the scale is remarkably
There has
different.
historically been a Jewish reluctance
Yeah,
to proselytize. We have had our moments. The Idumeans, I guess the Idumeans, that's our single largest example. That goes back. I mean, that goes back to the first century before the Common Era, I believe. So it's quite a while. I mean, the Khazars. There was apparently a real mass conversion among the Khazars, of people somewhere in Russia, but that was of their own doing, apparently.
yeah.
It wasn't due to any forced conversion. Okay, Wendy?
Yeah, this just reminds me of something our rabbi said when we were living in Reno. I forget what the time period was, but he said there was some period in time when it was a problem where so many people wanted to convert to Judaism because they noticed they didn't see Jewish people starving in the street. And so they wanted those services. So it was actually a problem that people wanted to convert to Judaism for the wrong reasons, which was just to be taken care of. I'm not remembering when this was though. It was a while ago though.
It would be helpful if you could identify the historical period, because that's not something I'm familiar with. The one thing I'm familiar with, like, I mean, you don't know, is that right? Wendy?
Yeah, I'm not remembering when it was.
I mean, does that ring a bell with anybody? I'm
I
not
mean,
saying,
the Depression is the only time I can think of that makes any logical sense in American history, but I don't know.
yeah, but the Depression was a time of pretty wide anti-Semitism.
Yeah, really, Father Coughlin and all.
Yeah, I don't think it was in the US. I think it was in Europe.
I mean,
I'm not remembering any details.
the one thing I do know, I read, but a while back, and I don't know a whole lot about, was that in the Roman Empire, in Rome, Judaism became very popular among Romans, and they developed a kind of a Judaic-like culture. They didn't convert, but they practiced Jewish practices. That's the only time I can think of. But what you're saying, Wendy, has some credibility, but I'm not familiar with it.
You should watch the great documentary film Life of Brian by Monty Python, which tells you all about that time period.
That's a really good movie.
Mel Brooks is a genius, aside from, well, so is Monty Python.
So here is one of the great images of God in the Torah. Vayomer hareini na et kavodecha, Moses says, behold, let me see your liver. Kavod is a word for liver, your essence. Let me see your presence, the translators choose. And God answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you.
Oh, I'm gonna need to get out of the driveway after this is over. Oh, I'm sorry. What?
And I will proclaim before you the name of Adonai, and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. But you cannot see my face, for a human being may not see me and live. Now we have a problem, which I think we can solve before we continue with this story, which I really love this image. Didn't we just see before that but Moses would go into the tent of meeting, and he and God would talk face to face, panim el panim? But here God says, Lo tuchal lirot et panai, the same word. Panai meaning hapanim shali. Lo tuchal lirot et panai, ki lo yar'eni ha'adam v'chai. So how is it that it says above that God and Moses talked face to face, and now God says no human being can see my face and live?
Is it possible he was talking to the messenger, the angel, or no? Because we have reference to that.
No, God, it says guys talk to God face to face. And at the end, when Moses dies, the text says no other person ever talked to God face to face. Moses was the greatest prophet. So how do we wiggle out of this?
Bad editing?
Say again?
I said bad editing.
Oh, could be.
Just not noticing the inconsistencies.
I mean, I don't have a good answer. I have a suggested answer, which is when it says Moses and God talked face to face, you didn't really mean it. There was some kind of really powerful confab going on, but it didn't mean that God allowed Moses to see God's face, God's presence entirely. Or another way, going back to what I said with Hartman, is that when God and Moses talked face to face, it was not the totality of God that God permitted, but rather the covenantal aspect of God, in which God diminished God's power in order to be able to talk to Moses directly. That's the best answer I can give. Betsy?
Well, I think that has to be it. I don't think he really could have spoken to him face to face, because verse 18 says, Moses said, let me behold your presence, as if he has never seen God face to face.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know why Moses would say that if he's been face to face with him.
Yeah, now see, here's where there may be bad editing, going back to Wendy's argument. You know, Moses says, Hareini not et kavodecha. And God responds by saying, um, panai. If the author had just said kavodi instead of panai, we wouldn't have a problem. We wouldn't have a linguistic problem. But that's my best guess. Christine, did you have a hand?
Yeah, I did, but I'm not sure if it's right. When the timing of this thing, you cannot see my face. It comes after, he's agreed to lead the people into to land of Canaan. But and maybe from that time forward, that's the price of, although it's mentioned earlier in the Bible that nobody sees him except they, or they die. But they can't see him from that time forth because he has agreed to do this. He's leading them, but he's not letting them know the full them, and that it will include Moses. But I don't think I even believe my own argument.
All right, so let me read the next few verses. So God said, "See, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence," and now he uses the word kivodi, "and as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. V'hasiroti et kapi, v'ra'ita et acharai, ufanai lo yareu, lo yareu. I beg your pardon. Yera'u, ufanai lo yera'u. My face must not be seen." And I don't know that it makes much of a difference, but that's in the passive tense, right? My face must not be seen. Hold on for a second, Wendy. So here's the image. You're going to go over to these rocks here, and I'm going to lift you up and put you in the cleft of the rock. And my hand, a physical image, I'm going to block your eyesight until I walk by you, and you can see my back, but my face you cannot see. So after Wendy speaks, I'm going to ask you to answer the question: what does it mean that you can see God's back, but not God's face? Wendy?
Yeah, well, I was just remembering that frequently in Hebrew, body parts are often used as prepositions. And if was, like in Genesis where he passes over the face of the deep and that whole thing. I'm wondering if we can apply that here of being above or below God, kind of in a kind of sense, or does that not work?
Well, I'm not sure the passage in Genesis, but I'm calling it up, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's like one of the first verses.
I know, I've got it right in front of me.
Yeah.
When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. So I'm not seeing what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a different translation than what I'm used to seeing. Usually I see it as I've seen translations as over the face of the deep. I guess we'd have to look at the Hebrew.
Well, I'll panay to home. I'm trying to see it. So tohu vavohu, the earth being unformed and void, v'choshech al panay tahom, with darkness over the surface of the deep. So they're translating panay as surface.
Right.
But I'm not seeing it functioning as a preposition in any event. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Like I mean as above or below and stuff like that. That's what I'm referring to.
Uh-huh. Okay, and how are you reading this? I need you to explain that again.
Well, if we say that we can't see his face, then we can't see what's above him. I don't know. I admit I'm probably reaching for straws, but I'm trying to look for an alternate way of looking at that just because of the whole,
Hebrew as also, body parts being prepositions. Also, when we say Rosh is the beginning of things, that's another body part that we use as a preposition.
Uh-huh. All right. All right. So the question I'm asking is, what does it mean to see God's back? Betsy?
So, I mean, I know that we're using physical words, face and front and back, but really God doesn't have a face or a back or a front, right? I mean, the word presence is more accurate to me. So I think this is about, when you say we can't see, I think this means that we cannot see all of God. We can't see, we can't know God. Maybe, if God really had a face and eyes, of course, it wouldn't be the God we believe in. And I don't think you can make an equivalency, to our bodies. I think it's more that you can't know all of God. You can know God's presence, something about God. You can have a relationship with God, but it can't be all of God. And so we can't see his back. I mean, I guess for us, seeing the face implies perhaps greater intimacy or greater ability to know somebody, to see the eyes, to see the actual face, but we can't know God like that. So that's my take on it.
All right, God's face. Tell me about God's face and God's back. Christine? I think you're muted. Christine, I think you're muted.
We're not God's equal, but we can follow and we can see what God has done, but we can't anticipate what will be done. So the face and back as metaphors of future and present path.
Anything else? Betsy?
I forgot one thing I wanted to say is that I think the image of God, shielding us from his whole presence, from his whole power, I find that so beautiful. I just love that image, that even though we can't know all of God, it doesn't mean that we're not protected, that we can't have a relationship, that we're not loved by God. And I think that's really powerful and very, very beautiful part of that phase that maybe gets of that phrase that maybe gets a little lost in the debate of front or back. It's more the love, I think, that comes through that's important.
Jason?
I was just thinking that isn't one of the translations of God's name, I will be what I will be. And so if you think of that as a future, then you can only see it from the back. Like I will be what I will be. I mean, he's in front of us. He's in the future and we're trailing. It's just an idea that came to me.
All right. I need to take Shayna, and then I need to take a 5-minute break. And then when I come back, I'll read you my story if you're interested. Shayna?
It's a slightly tangential question. We may not need to address it fully, especially if you'd like a break. But while we've been talking about this, all that I've been able to think about is how Moses's request to see the divine face. I think Betsy hit it right on the money with the desire to know. And is that really that dissimilar from the Israelites' desire to know what's going on with Moses or to see something physical?
Uh-huh. Yeah, we kind of skipped over that when God. I mean, and that's the part about the two drinking scotch and smoking cigars. Forgive the masculine image. Nobody jumped on me about the masculine image of God smoking a cigar, but it's Moses saying, God, you and I, we've been through a lot. I mean, and especially now, we've been through a lot, and I think I deserve for you to show me more about what you are. And God says, as Betsy said, it's not humanly possible. I am I, and you are you, and I can diminish myself so that we don't have an asymmetrical relationship when we meet in the tent of meeting. But ultimately, my relationship to you, Moses, to the people, and indeed to any human being is asymmetrical. I am so vastly different from what you are that if I were to somehow allow you to see that totality of me, you would die. You know, there's that story about the four who entered the Pardes. It's a midrash, and I'm telling this off the top of my head, so I can't remember the characters. Well, although one of them is Rabbi Akiva, and one goes insane, one becomes a heretic. It may just be three, I don't remember. And Akiva is the only one, Rabbi Akiva is the only one who walks into the Pardes. The Pardes is understood as being engaging in some kind of mystical activity, which in fact enables them to see God's liver, to experience God's totality. The liver in antiquity being like, it was the liver in the body was understood to have a larger role in conducting the human body than it does. And only Akiva walks out. One dies, that's what it is. One dies, one becomes insane, one becomes a heretic, and only Akiva, who apparently was of such great spiritual and moral qualities, survived. But I need 5 minutes. I gotta take care of something. I'll be right back, and then we'll do the story. That's a great story. I'll be right back. No, I take a shot of insulin in the morning. And if I don't eat breakfast, if I stupidly don't eat breakfast, my blood sugar will go down. So I got a warning. I have the sensor on my arm. Anybody who's diabetic ought to get these sensors. And I got a message that my blood sugar was low, so I took some sugar. Give me just a second. I'll bring up the story. All right, let's see. But why Aaron didn't die. He was having the vacation of all time up there on Mount Sinai, not an iota of stress. The unmistakable sense that everything was A-OK. Hold on, I'm going to have to reduce you even more. Everything was A-OK. He was spending time with the best friend a lawgiver could ever have, and Moses had never felt better. Even some chronic pain that had recently taken residence in his lower back had all but disappeared. Is there any wonder that years later so many hospitals would be named after this hidden locale in the middle of a desert? In the future, thinkers with time on their hands would ponder the weighty meaning of those days atop Sinai, and ask difficult questions about the religious significance of nearly 6 weeks spent alone in the presence of the Creator. Notwithstanding the ruminations of future sages, Moses himself was thinking not one grave or particularly metaphysical thought. He could care less about the meaning of his human mind communing with the divine mind and the epistemological implications of this fact. No, indeedy. He was perfectly content being unreflective during his sojourn there, enjoying history's most famous 40-day vacation. Oh, yes, it was immeasurably more satisfying than facing that riffraff down there, those undisciplined masses he had helped shepherd across the sea into the desert and had brought to the foot of this mountain. Oh, don't get me wrong, there had been extraordinary moments in the course of his leadership. The burning bush confronting Pharaoh time after time had been a hoot. Leading that ragtag band of former slaves across the divided sea. Oh my, wasn't that something? Hiking down the path into the sea hiking down onto the path that the sea had made for him and his people, walking in between the walls of water suspended on either side like jelly in a jar, with fish of all varieties staring out at them, mystified. Then up and out of the sea. That was surely world class. But then there was the water incident and so many complaints, a constant barrage of murmuring, kvetching, as Eastern European descendants would call it. A chronic wah, 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 we want, gimme, 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 that preoccupied and wearied Moses so much that lately, when among his people, he found himself yawning at the most inappropriate moments, such as when passing judgment on Sabbath stick gatherers. Being a liberator is not all it's cracked up to be. Oh, it's steady work, all right, and one rarely has to worry about having one's personal needs met. But there's always food on the table and $1 in the bank. But the hours are terrible, and the liberated tend to become just a trifle exasperating after the actual liberation's grown cold. Oi. But up here on the mountain talking with God about law, not law, you understand, law. That was better than even the burning bush. The bush's flames moved here and there. Law was solid as steel. The bush was one time only. The law was forever. It was glorious having God for a companion 24 hours a day for, how long had it been now? For 40 days. At one point, Moses realized he hadn't had a cup of coffee for ages and yet felt a clarity that lately he'd only been able to achieve from large daily doses of caffeine. But as always happens, it seems, the divine times were not to last. It came to a head on the 40th morning. God and Moses were discussing the Jubilee year, the time when all things come to a stop and slaves are set free. Declare liberation throughout the land. Oh yes, this was law at its best. The equalizing of all things human, the reduction of all human equations to a single spectacular common denominator. What a law to give to former slaves. How completely they would intuitively understand its inner truth. Through the very act of thinking the idea that the law as instruction would teach such a simple yet profound truth, Moses slipped into a state of bliss. Contemplating the theory behind shatnez, the law against mixing wool and flax, that had also thrown Moses into a state of bliss. But this was by far a much better state of bliss. But strong bliss or weak bliss, bliss was by now a familiar, agreeable condition to Moses, our teacher, our rabbi, who had spent the last 40 days in dialogue with the master of dialogue. In the midst of this blissfulness, Moses heard God's voice boom as he had never heard it boom. Damn, the voice cried so loud that all the birds flew away. Moses jumped. Moses, God said in a tone angry and frightening. Moses, your children are at it again. My children? Your children. They're mine when they bungle and yours when they do something good, eh? They're yours most of the time. Thanks for the privilege. You're welcome. What is it now? Moses asked, a despondent feeling creeping over him, accompanied by that familiar feeling that destiny was once again taking a hand. Seems they miss you down there, said God with just a note of irony. They miss you a lot. It's good to be missed, oh God, though I hear something in your tone that tells me you don't approve of how they're expressing their longing for my return. Well, let me put it to you this way, said the master of all creation. I'm not a great fan of gold sculpture. What do you mean? May I suggest you go down and have a look? I have a feeling the right answer to your question gives me very little wiggle room. You might say that. I have a feeling I'm not going to like what I see. You might say that. I have a feeling we're saying goodbye to our private time. A pause. You might say that. So with more reluctance than most humans can imagine, Moses took his staff and the few other belongings he had brought with him, and how much do you really need when you're off to visit your maker, and prepared for the descent to the desert. Moses, said God, yes, yes, aren't you forgetting something? And Moses thought for a moment. Ah, yes, he replied. And Moses picked up the 2 tablets of the law, a rather good summary of his time up here, and made his way down the mountain and returned to the desert. At the foot of it, he encountered Joshua. Joshua, a man of remarkable patience, had been waiting there for quite some time for his master's return. Boss, it's great to see you, said Joshua. I think we're in big trouble. What's going on? I'm not sure, boss. All I can tell you is that for the last while, the noise coming from the camp has been wickedly loud. Moses sighed. Then I guess we have to check it out. Right, boss. Moses and Joshua rushed back to the camp where, with little observation and not an inconsiderable amount of dismay, they quickly ascertained that the Israelites had constructed for themselves a golden bovine statue and were in the process of placing their minds and hearts at its inanimate disposal, resoundingly swearing loyalty to it, praying for it to disperse milk from its divine golden udders. Milk, we want milk, they cried. Milk. We need milk, must have milk, milk to drink, milk for cakes, milk for cookies, milk for coffee, milk for cheese, milk for the babies. Give us milk, O magnificent cow. And together all the Israelites engaged in this preposterous activity, and there were more of them than Moses cared to count, sank to their knees and with hands outstretched above their heads, in unison they prostrated themselves toward their lifeless master, uttering in unison a low, mooing sound, like so many head of afflicted livestock, punctuating the night air. Oi, thought Moses, it's come to this. Sadly, he realized, yes, it has come to this. A cow. My people are worshiping a cow. An eagle, all right, a mountain lion, fine, and even a ram would have projected at least a noble and powerful image, but throwing yourself on the ground to a veal chop, even one made of precious metal, this compounded humiliation on top of aggravation. So, though the pair of them wanted to laugh at his kinsman, immersed in the act of supplication to a baby steer, Moses knew it was action that was called for, forceful and decisive. Well, dear reader, you know almost certainly what happened next. The tablets smashed, the statue destroyed, the perpetrators killed, the people cowed and repentant, and history altered. The people Israel would never be the same. Later that night, Moses found himself alone with his brother Aaron. Aaron was looking none too good for wear as he faced his brother over his deed. Aaron, you'll recall, had with remarkable alacrity acquiesced to the people's demand to build the statue. But Moses wasn't in the mood for further recriminations. He sat there rubbing his lower back, facing his older brother, downing a large cup of strong black coffee, his third of the evening, wondering. Aaron, he began. Yes, I have a question. Maybe you can answer it, maybe you can't. Try me. Well, frankly, and don't get me wrong, I'm puzzled over why you're alive. You helped build the thing, and by rights, you should be dead. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm happy you're not dead. You're my brother and I love you. But it seems to me you shouldn't be here. Aaron answered. At first, when the dust cleared and I was alive, I was surprised too, but as I thought about it, I understood why. Why? You know, Moses, I'm not like you. I can speak well enough, and there are priestly functions I perform well enough, far better than you, as a matter of fact. But the people, they just don't listen to me the way they listen to you. So what? It wasn't long after you went up to the mountain that the complaining began. Where's your brother, Aaron? When's he coming back, Aaron? Who's going to take care of us now, Aaron? Who's going to get us out of here, Aaron? And after a while, things started getting out of hand. They were getting rowdy, and I was just afraid if I had to face them alone, it would be curtains for the daughters of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, the sons and daughters of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. All you had to do was hold out. You knew I was coming back. Were you? After a while, I started believing maybe you weren't. You never said, Aaron, mind the store for a few weeks, and if you didn't come back, who could blame you? These people are a handful, I don't mind telling you. If I were in your place, I'd think long and hard about how to arrange matters so I could stay up there. Every time I heard some thunder coming from the general direction of the mountain, I thought of you. I thought of how wonderful it must be to be up there alone with him. He's not exactly a him, Aaron. God is genderless. Whatever. Anyway, they demanded the statue, and I figured it was as good a time as any to move things along and bring you back. I guess God agreed with me. I guess I did the right thing. It was then that Moses had one of his frequent moments of clarity that most of us are privileged to have if we have one at all, once, maybe twice in a lifetime. He'd been set up. The golden calf was a ruse to bring him back. It was so abundantly clear to him now that all he could do was sit motionless, amazed at the simplicity of the scheme. He'd been set up. Without the golden calf, he might have elected to remain up there on the mountain, and no one could have the least rational argument to oppose his decision. Aaron looked at Moses uncertainly. I guess I did the right thing, he repeated. I guess you did, Moses sighed. And off in the distance, if you listened carefully, you could hear God's soft laughter riffling through the evening silence. Well, that's one answer to the question. Well,
That's
I
great
guess
commentary. That is truly, that is taking the story and making it your own. I mean, and they say what the greatest commentator on Torah is you, right? So you've done it, and I applaud it.
So whenever, I frequently pause in teaching Torah at a question that the Torah asks that it doesn't answer, and say, those of you in retirement should write a midrash about that. In fact, Wendy did, and she's not in retirement. Wendy did write a midrash.
I need to get back to it. I'm very embarrassed it's taken me this long to finish.
There you have it.
I need to get going. Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, it's time for us to go. We've gone to the end of the hour. Shabbat shalom. See you in 2 weeks.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.